If your websites conduct transactions or collect sensitive data, you have a material risk on your hands that could cost millions. The client-side security gap is being exploited daily with attacks like digital skimming, credential harvesting, and form jacking. 98% of sites use first and third-party JavaScript to power and enhance the user experience, opening up the client side to the adversary. Unlike most things in security, there is an easy fix. Start by understanding your risk. Let Source Defense give you a site-wide risk report this week. Visit securityweekly.com/source defense. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Join us April 14th to learn how to monitor your Wi-Fi network for attacks with Enzyme, a free and open source wireless intrusion detection system. Myself, Larry, and Leonard, who is the lead author of the Enzyme open source project, will be doing a webcast. A lot of fun. Register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. Make sure you check out our on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Lee Neely is here with us. Josh Morpeth has dropped off for the evening. Lee Neely, as you heard in the last segment, has joined us, and I'm happy you're here, along with everyone else. Welcome, Lee.
Oh, that's a great way. I love capping off my Wednesdays with having a chance to hang out with you guys on the show.
We love having you, man. Thanks. And you got lots of stories in there, so I want to make sure we get to some of those as well. Lots of interesting stories in the news this week. It's kind of, I was speaking with someone earlier. I was like, the Russia-Ukraine conflict obviously going on, but when I looked at the cybersecurity news, the news related to that seems to be on a little downswing this week. Yeah. I'm not sure what's attributed to that. If it's just people got tired and needed to move on to something else, or if there's not a lot of news about that this week, that's fine. But I didn't see a lot of that going on this week, being reported anyway. There's a lot of things going on, obviously.
Right.
But I didn't see a lot in the reports of like, we're pulling out of Russia, we're stopping the service in Russia, this is attack. And I skipped over some of it, admittedly. So I want to go to our illustrious team here. And is there anything with this ongoing conflict in cybersecurity aspect and lens that we want to highlight this week?
I think there was a couple, was it VMware, I think, was one of the biggest shutdowns. Like VMware dropped all support for Russia and products there. So I don't know if they disconnected or it was that cloud environment. I wasn't 100% sure. I was looking for the article right now.
There was there was someone that was speculating that, and I forget who. I apologize. I forget who it was. It might have been Dimitri at CrowdStrike was speculating that if and as, I guess both, right, as commercial software support starts to dwindle from Russia, basically in protest to what's happening, that Russia will turn towards more open source solutions. I think in high level theory, probably true, but I don't think that's an immediate thing. I mean, all of us know, if you've got a commercial solution, you can't just drop that at a moment's notice and implement an open source solution. That's not on the table. That's a long game. That's not. Most of us here on the show, many of us listening, right? My famous line: all of us on the show, most of us listening, have been in those situations where you got to change out technology. It's a project. Uh-huh. It's sometimes a big project. I mean,
I think a lot of companies there are sort of hanging back and hoping that that something will get resolved before they have to go down that road.
I agree.
So I think they're just going to sit on it and say, well, we're not getting any support, but we can't yank all the VMware we have out and replace it all with something open source.
Especially VMware, dude.
How do you even do that?
You can.
No, but how do you do that?
Open source software will recognize the VMware format, but in my experience, that's get your dice, shake it up,
and it's a big transition though too for your staff because you roll off something, everybody's on board, they've been trained and everything else, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we're going to put this new product in, and it's a whole different ball game. And maybe it'll recognize, but it's not as easy as just pushing a button and we start over.
There's not a lot of technology that you can just swap out on a whim.
Not at that level.
There's some things obviously that are easier than others. Not a lot of things are just drop and
I
replace.
mean, imagine just telling people they couldn't use Word. I mean, just go to any company and say, okay, you can't use Word anymore. You have to use this. And
it's a project, dude.
It's a project. It's a training.
There's planning. There's requirements.
Training, help
there's training.
Patching, all that stuff, and then you got to make sure it's compatible. And there's on and on and on. And you got, you have 100,000 documents at archive, and when you load them into, I don't know, some open office, they're all misformatted. And they don't.
But you need a good IT team. And even the easier ones, like I could probably swap out the browser, but I need some sophistication as an IT organization.
You got to retrain your help
swap
desk.
out the browser. Swap out the browser. I could swap out my password manager. Like there's migration paths, for doing that are going to take what's in my current password manager, port it to my new one. Some of those are easier than other things. I'm not saying it's easy, but in the difficulty scale, there's certainly a scale.
Trade Notepad for WordPad.
You talk about that. That's a small endeavor when you're thinking or comparing it to something like a hypervisor, right? So you've got your bare metal has to be migrated and compatible. You've got all of your data that has, iSCSI LUNs. It's got all the AD built into those. All the VMs are all configured. Like you don't just migrate VMs. Not even from
dude. Yeah,
I tried that once, and that was on non-production experimental systems, and I tried that, and it was like, okay, now nothing works. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was just literally, no offense to Hyper-V. It didn't have anything to do with Hyper-V. It was just, I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how to make it work. It wasn't that it was a bad product or anything like that. It was just, this is all VMware, hypervisors. I got to go in here and I got to try to bare metal this over to Hyper-V. And it was like, okay, I don't know how much time I've got.
I've got some experience with VirtualBox QEMU, and like it's kind of wonky, man. Like you can get it to work in the right conditions. It's a little wonky.
It's not quite enterprise grade with high scale HO failover, vMotion, live production, 10 gigabit throughput to every host and VNIC and kernel. Like there's an entirely different, all the apps and add-on, vSAN and all the security platforms.
And even just telling your programming team, we're not going to use PyCharm anymore. We're going to use something else. We're going to use CodeBlock or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, both those are fine products. It's just, but everybody knows it.
Dude, it's funny you say that. I'm training a team, and like I use PyCharm, and like my training is like, I think this tool is pretty good, and here's how I use it. And like, it's not just a code editor at that point; it's a tool environment. I use it to interface with my Docker environment. I use it to interface with my databases, and I'm like, look, if you want to get going on this project, which happens to be in our case PPWorks, right? I'm like, I built it around PyCharm because my dev team has always been really small. It's been me and one other developer pretty much at all times. Like I don't even remember a time where I had more than just myself and maybe one other developer. And so like this helps us as a tool set. You want to move off of that tool set, now it's a huge headache, man. Like
I mean, I've tried that too, just because I was teaching different classes, and it was like, oh yeah, or different schools or whatever, and they're like, we don't use this, we use this, and you're like, oh my god, and everything's different, and you don't know what stuff means, and it's just it's a time sucker, and you're gonna.
You've got two real big problems over there, though. Too, you've got all the businesses and corporations that are trying to run that utilize these pieces of software from us, but you also have the vendors that are within inside of Russia. Take Kaspersky, for example, that are trying to play this out, figure out, how they play into the state and not get sucked up or go bankrupt while still being able to do business across the rest of the world. Like you've got two completely separate problems that tie into each other. That is going to be a long-term strategy that I don't know how that's going to play out for Russian economics. I think
there was a Russian-related article. It's my story number 8. I think independent of the conflict, we'd probably be covering this type of article. And was it CISA? Yep, it was CISA.
Yeah.
Russian state-sponsored cyber actors are accessing network misconfigured with default MFA protocols. This one was interesting because I tend to promote MFA as like something you must do. Like, given all its pitfalls and all that kind of stuff, you're better off with it than without it. However, once you have it, you got to be mindful of attacks like this. So they said the actors modified a domain controller file, the Windows Etsy host file. They are redirecting Duo MFA calls to localhost instead of the Duo server. That prevented the MFA service from contacting its servers, effectively disabling MFA because Duo for Windows is defaulting to fail open. Now, I want to pick on Duo. They are not the only MFA solution that defaults to fail open. In fact, I think if you looked, pretty much all of them default to a fail open in this scenario. So it's not a knock on Duo. It's just it's an attack bypassing them. Tyler, I'm sure you've used this like in your pen test, right? Like this is
we've abused it. We've abused the crap out of this, and it is almost all MFAs from a default configuration standpoint. In fact, this is a little bit more novel because they're redirecting it to localhost, so they already have access. So they're leveraging that for GUI level access because command line tools don't use MFA, and those protocols typically don't support MFA. So this is obviously for GUI access for jump hosts or something. But the fail open is a common one that's leveraged on the outside for denial of service, and they time it very, very strategically with botnets so that they hit the API that company is going to be calling back to.
Oh, right.
Or take down the DNS record for their specific MFA, and that's how they do it. So it's a great idea.
Also, Tyler, I want to ask you about the registering and or re-registering with the MFA with Duo, right? With the MFA service.
Yeah, the re-enrollment is another process. In fact, this is one of the other ones that we've commonly abused is we'll actually password spray, look for all those accounts, get one of those accounts, and log into it. We look for inactive accounts, and it has a re-enrollment period where if they haven't logged in, they have to reset that up for Duo, or they haven't set up multi-factor.
Right. That's an important point. You get access to an account where the MFA has expired or never been enrolled, and therefore you can re-enroll or enroll in the first place just because you've password spraying on that one account.
Yep. And that's a common tactic that we've done for admin accounts. That's why inactive enabled admin accounts is one of the checks that we look for in most organizations.
I mean, I included this story too. I had a different version of it, but it's the same. It's the same problem. But the reason I included it was because I've been getting this sort of vibe off people about we have MFA, we're good.
Yeah, but that's we're compliant, we're good. We have a firewall.
I know. I mean, I'm not saying it's okay.
But
I'm saying that
it's a common misconception.
Yeah,
even in cyber insurance, that was one of their biggest weighted questions at one point across several cyber insurance companies was, do you have MFA internally?
Yep.
Well, that shouldn't be weighted all that heavily. I'm going to tell you, it's very rare that I have to go and hit an RDP session that's going to have that MFA on it. I'm going to be using WMI. I'm going to be using API calls, direct PowerShell, .NET, all those things that don't support MFA and are not going to be protected by that MFA. So it really doesn't make any difference. But externally, the rule of thumb is externally, everything is MFA. Internally, probably MFA your jump boxes and deny everything else except for RDP, and that's the one case in which your MFA may be a good idea.
And sorry, Doug, you were saying?
No, that was my point. I agree completely. Okay. I was just trying to get to that defense in depth kind of idea and be careful about adopting solutions and saying we're good.
Right.
That's or we're compliant, we're good.
Yeah, that internal stuff, I still think we're kind of lazy on that too.
Oh, right? Internal is incredibly lazy. I mean, I see that all the time. Like Lawrence and Ricky were talking about, just the fact that you could produce a network diagram is wow, that's a big move forward for a lot of companies who, if you ask them what does their assets look like, they're just I don't know. I think a guy did a paper printout back in '97, and that should be close, kind of thing.
Did you read my math articles, Doug, in Slack?
No.
It's my story number 12. We'll come back to it. Maybe give you a chance to look at some of that stuff.
Oh, this is about the ancient algorithm.
Dude, oh my God!
Dude.
It took me back to helping.
It's a Fermat.
Helping my oldest son in middle school with his math. Oh God! I gotta hold on. That's algebra. Hold on. I gotta read the thing and watch the video and then try and help you with it.
It's like a Fermat factoring problem, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Fermat's I don't know. Fermat's factorization method.
Yeah.
Was Pierre de Fermat first described this method in 1643. It was the fact that any odd number can be expressed as the difference between two squares.
Right.
And I got to the point when you could like reduce that down, and I'm like, oh, yeah, right. Like if it is odd and it's two squares and you reduce it down and you do the mathematical equation, I get that part.
All factoring is about reducing computation space.
Right.
So, I mean, it's
so they cut it in half in this case?
You could. I mean, maybe even more. So those kind of factoring problems allow you to really cut down on how much time something's going to take. So it's just a faster way to do a problem.
And in this case, Doug, the RSA keys are generated from primes that are too close together. They're not as random as they should be. Therefore, you can use Fermat's algorithm.
Because they're pseudo-random instead of random, because it's really hard to get random, and they're too close together. And then if they're close enough, then you can use Fermat's factoring theory, and that reduces the computation space. And when you do that, then you can reduce the amount of time it takes to crack something.
So this was a flaw in safe zone crypto libraries developed by a company called Inside Secure. And there's a whole history there. And there was a researcher that applied this technique from 1643 in order to...
math is math. It doesn't matter if it came from the 17th century, it came from last week. And
kind of philosophical, right? But when you talk about mathematical equations and or programming languages, it's interesting how the spoken language can be completely different, but you can all speak the same language of math and or a programming language, because it is a language, right?
You can reduce it down to mathematical equations. Everybody can speak the same language.
So pretty crazy.
That's why they put math in that stuff they send off for aliens to find, so they can locate us.
Because it's a universal language.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I mean, that's a big leap.
They're going to show up and enslave us all. Yeah,
I'm sure there's whole podcasts you could listen to about aliens. But.
There's whole podcasts you can listen to about math.
Yes. That's not this podcast, though. Lee.
So when I ran across my story number 6 about cutting the amount of neon in half used for making chips, I was thinking of Paul because of all his challenges trying to get GPUs that would work, that were like supply chain limited. And all of a sudden, we have half the neon needed to make the chips. And I thought, holy crap. Mm-hmm. And I thought
what is the element that is, there's a number of different elements, right? They're required to make chips. And this is where I need to do more research on that. But it's part of the supply chain problem, right?
Right.
Neon being one of them.
A noble gas.
A noble gas, yes.
Noble gas.
It is a noble gas.
Of neon, a.k.a. Ukraine. One of the other rare earth metals used in chip manufacturing was in, I believe, Venezuela. And there was a interesting coup that happened to overthrow governments when people were trying to mine there.
Yeah.
Nation states were.
But you're right. Like, there's political climates, there's the pandemic, there's invasions and wars that all affect the global supply chain because of the natural resources required to make chips. And I'm not again, I'd love to bring someone on that could like talk about this in a few different scenarios about how all that's been impacted, right? Because it's not just one thing. Like the pandemic was one thing, but like there's other things that are impacting the global supply chain for chips.
Well, everything's a global market now. I mean, it's so you make chips in China, you need all these different components that they buy from other places,
from other countries,
or that they mine, or they take over the country and say, "Wow, they've got a really good supply of something we want," and so they go take them over, or whatever.
But I mean, there are efforts and conversations happening to move some of that to the U.S. There's already some of that happening in the U.S.
Well,
but
if you can,
but you got to scale it,
and you have to have the resources,
and you have to get the resources. Right.
I mean, if you don't have any neon, you can't. You have to have it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have it here in the U.S., you can't buy it here in the U.S. You got to buy it from somewhere else.
If you blow it all up, then nobody gets it. So.
Right. And, to Tyler's point, like in Venezuela, if there's a political climate where it's being sabotaged or whatever, then we're screwed.
Right.
That's scary.
Because you can't make a neon laser without neon.
And you can't make chips without certain other elements.
The lasers are used for the chips. Use a neon laser to etch the
etch the chips.
Yeah, they etch the circuits with the neon laser. So if you don't have that, then you either have to try to come up with something else, or you don't make any chips.
Well, that's interesting. So that means it's not just the components or elements that go into the chip itself, but it's in the manufacturing process. You might need other resources that help you make. Yeah, I got you.
So it's all a big, giant supply chain problem, and that's a really different thing in the modern age than it was in these wars from even the 20th century.
Right,
because suddenly it's like, wow. I mean, if you ask
we need metal. There's
lots of ways. If you ask somebody
in
1990, what's the importance of the Ukraine? Everybody's like, what the hell's the Ukraine? And now it's like, but we all trade with everybody, and in fact, if you go look, it's like, look how much trade we have with Russia. The evil empire that everybody grew up hating, and it's like, but look how much money we trade with them, and we buy our fertilizer from there, and we buy this from there, and they make this, and China too. China's like our enemy. But like that's where almost everything we buy comes from, which is a really weird thing to me, because it's like, okay, they're the enemy, but we buy everything from China. So how are they our enemy exactly? I know they are, but it's like a really complicated thing, because like they're our enemy on this side of the table.
But it sounds like you're oversimplifying, but you're not.
I am. Well, I am a little bit. But I mean, it's like global eco-politic kind of weirdness, and I don't think anybody really understands the impact of all this stuff yet, because they still live in this little world of sovereignty, and they go, who cares what happened to Argentina? It's like some foreign country. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah, but, I just want my iPhone. I want my computer.
Right, but then they go, well, Argentina, collapsed in some kind of a coup. It didn't, but I mean, if Argentina collapses and you find out, we can't get this, and then China can't buy this from there, and then they can't make this, and that's the board that goes in that, and we can't build a tank because we need a board that was made in China with neon from the Ukraine and other parts from here and there all over the world.
But also it's people resources too. Like, companies in the U.S., as we all well know, have developers that live and work in different countries. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, we've all worked with or for companies who have developers that are not based here in the U.S., and that could be any number of countries. Any number.
Yep. And you eventually may get to William Gibson's vision of dystopian future, where everybody works for a company and that's who takes care of you. And countries don't matter anymore. It's just, do you work for this or do you work for that?
The vision he had was pretty amazing, right?
TPC.
Was that Neuromancer? Was that?
I don't know if that one, but TPC was the company in the President's Analyst. It was the phone company.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, they all had that little jack in their foot.
Yep. That guy was really visionary.
Obscure references for 100, Alex?
Good Lord. The science fiction that could become reality. That could be a whole podcast in itself, right? Like looking at science fiction.
That could be fun.
Right?
That would be a lot of fun, yeah.
Right?
I think we need a lot of alcohol.
Blade Runner,
any Arthur C. Clarke all day long, Heinlein, all those guys that were looking at like these dystopian futures and science futures and all this very visionary stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah. Let's see. Samsung leaked some source code. A lot of source code. 190 gig or something like that, right? Wasn't that the number in the article I read? It was like, it was not insignificant.
It was a big number.
190 gig of data.
Yeah.
Yep. And in that, GitGuardian did the analysis, and there were more than 6,600 secret keys, including private keys, usernames, passwords, AWS keys, Google keys, and GitHub keys. Now, my comment was like, yikes. But also, how many of those are valid? How many of those are, I don't know. Maybe it is a yikes thing. I don't think I could argue that it's not a bad situation. I mean, sure, but to have over 6,000 sets of keys, that's, also you could advocate for secrets vaults and stuff like that. But if your secrets vault gets leaked as well. So do all your keys.
Was this the one where they were using this then to push stuff into the app stores and everything because they got the certs and all that as well?
Yeah. Could be. I mean, there was
a story like that about Samsung and all that it was maybe last week where they were talking about now they've got all this ability to push things into the app stores because it's
Possibly.
What
I was worried about.
Some of those are going to be hardware keys though, and that's some you've got driver keys, you've got some app signing stuff for what Samsung calls their
crappy apps. They get installed by default that you can't remove.
Yeah, they're secure app verification. It's kind of like Windows app. Knox, I think, is what it's called.
Knox. That was the story I was talking about. Knox was that hardware keying system that allowed them to then, if they can, work with that, they can push stuff into the app stores.
But is that their Samsung apps, an app store for their devices, right? Because they make refrigerators and not their TVs, but.
So these are particular to the phones, if I remember, because it's the verified messaging apps. The source code's valid, it's signed, it's running in a secure sandbox with inside of the OS that's isolated from even the App Store and what gets installed from Google Play. So an entirely separate trust zone that allows those things to operate at a lower level with more security built in.
And on top of that, the Samsung Knox Trust Zone has been approved by both the UK and US government for protecting low-level classified data.
Oh.
So if the source for that is out, go bye-bye the protection agreement, and that's a big blow to Samsung.
Yeah, it was the Galaxy device, the source code for that Galaxy device.
All right, so it was limited to their phones, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But... I mean, Samsung.
Well, maybe unless they use that same. They may use a lot of that source code in their other things as well.
How many phones are in circulation running all that code? I mean,
stoves.
What code? Yeah, what keys are leveraged for biometric storage? So if you have an image of an old phone and you're able to extract biometric, because the encryption keys were part of the OS inside of one of the chips or the trusted zone, that's obviously a big problem, but. They have a lot more data, and this group, I think it's Lapsus.
Yep,
it's very interesting. This is the same group that claimed Ubisoft and Vodafone and Nvidia.
Yeah, they got a string of recent. What is Lapsus? Lapsus has been around for a while.
That's it's a ransomware. They're not even a ransomware group, and that's kind of the weird thing. They're not affiliated. They say they have no political motives. They're not out there ransoming, but they are trying to make money. That's their whole goal without ransoming, and they've got high-level access. And so they're doing it in a very randomized and disparate way. They're not very organized. It's not like a corporation or a ransomware gang that's very strategic, who they went after, how the process happened. These guys are like an old-school hacker gang. They just do whatever they want and however they want to do it. So it's making people question we don't really have cyber insurance because there's not really negotiations. The way they want to pay is out of band. Maybe they're leaking something before they even have the chance to pay. It's a very sporadic group to kind of follow and keep tabs on how they're going to react to certain things. So it's interesting.
I was talking with someone about Alan Liska, actually, from Recorded Future. Did an interview with him yesterday when I was at Oceans and Bryant University SecureCon 22 conference, which was awesome. We were talking about the profile of ransomware groups. Had a great conversation, and it's interesting. This is when I read this article, I'm like, oh yeah. I had this question for Alan on the tip of my brain, and we didn't get to it because we're doing those short kind of interview formats, so we have to bring Alan back. But Alan's kind of mission is to provide information, telemetry on ransomware groups, and we got talking about how they're operating as legitimate organizations. The question I didn't ask was that was on the tip of my brain that I got lost was do the developers or employees know that they're working for a cyber criminal organization? Because maybe maybe you don't. And this article explained it to me that some people actually that work for these organizations don't even know they're working for a criminal organization. They think they're working for a software company. And why not? I get a salary. I get benefits. I'm writing software that does stuff.
I'm the employee of the month at Murder Corporation.
This is great.
They segmented how they did recruiting was very interesting for certain pieces of what they were working on, like the UI front end, some of the web app design, even some of the programming code that was not for a specific thing, like a pipeline. They were getting their Gits and stuff set up. So they have a bunch of people that were getting resumes, and they went through the proper channels to actually source resumes. They paid the fees for the resume headhunters and the service that was doing that. They had a separate chat channel. They were getting set up. They did the interviews just like a regular company. And, some people were suspicious, and some people called them flat out, and they burned the access, shut them off, and just wiped that info.
It probably depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, so it says in the article, many of its employees don't even know they're working for a cyber criminal outfit. Some probably chose to look the other way, but the turnover that they observed was still high. So what they surmised was when an employee figures it out, they tend to leave.
But I mean,
not everyone, but like some people are like, oh, I could never do that. But other people are like, oh, like I don't know, I got like a pretty good gig. Like
I'm going to work for Halliburton. They make nuclear weapons or whatever. I've
good salary, benefits.
I've been hired by companies to write code before, and I didn't really know what the purpose of the code was. They were like, can you write us this piece of a code? And if it, I didn't know what the overall end result. Like, here, can you write us a search algorithm? Okay. And so you write them a nice search algorithm, and you say, well, how do you meet some people and go, well, how much data are you searching, and can it just be like a straight up line by line search, or does it need to be binary?
Right.
Do you need to do other kind of tricks?
Yeah, like searching and sorting algorithms, especially can be like really not benign, but like really like abstract. Like you can use this for whatever you want, right?
I mean, like if a guy named Tony comes in and says, I need to buy like some ammo. You don't know if you're you're just issuing ammo. You don't know that they're going out and shooting people in New Jersey. I mean, it's like, it's like, I just sell ammo. I don't know. Like the guy, he's maybe he's a mobster.
Some of them were also signing up, and they thought that they were part of a bug bounty program or a pen test company. Like they sold it as a security offering that did subsidize security testing against these companies. And, some people caught on eventually, and others asked questions and they got over it. So,
and like I say, there's role relativism, which is there's
asked questions and then disappeared. Tyler, is that?
A couple of the groups were less. They had things compartmentalized. So if you're at that level, probably not. But you didn't mess around. You got to a certain level, like where they had high level access, and there were a lot of people that went off the grid, and you see a lot of the people get real cagey and real nervous. I mean, each of these were broken up into departments. You had an OSINT department that built packages on companies that, started the negotiations and were getting data long before initial access was even started, just to see if they even had to get initial access, because they had a lot of open source stuff. So they had different departments to handling each of these steps, and a lot of that's compartmentalized, even from like the dev group. So, where you were at made a big difference.
I want to transition to the story about Google Chrome zero-day exploitation. I think the most interesting aspect of this story that I found was that it could be, so the article basically proves, right, if you do the math, this is very basic math than the other story we talked about. This is like counting. If you count the number of zero-day exploits that are being exploited and or disclosed in Google Chrome over the years, the number is much higher recently than previously. One of the explanations for this, and not the only one, is that since Flash has been like basically fully obsoleted, buried, like put in the dumpster was lit and
cut out with a hacksaw.
Yeah, like Flash is dead. Attackers don't have that as an access vector, so they have to find vulnerabilities and exploits and write exploits for things within the browser itself.
So I
thought that was a pretty logical explanation.
Don't make work for yourself, and when you can just exploit Flash, why not? But now that you can't do that, you got to find other. Yeah, so
Flash had so many vulnerabilities. They were like, "Oh, this is great. I don't need to like figure the I also believe that it was probably easier to discover Adobe Flash vulnerabilities than to dig into the browser to find browser vulnerabilities, especially more modern browsers that have that separation of processing.
Yeah.
Like if you pull apart Chrome, there's like V8, which is the JavaScript interpretation. There's the part of the engine that does the isolation in the tabs. There's the core part of it, like it's broken up into parts. Those parts communicate over internal APIs. It's I think a lot more complex than to go, oh, if I load a Flash object, I can just exploit Flash. So I think that's one of the, not the sole reason, but one of the reasons why.
Learning curve.
Yeah, we're seeing more people talk at the browser. I mean, why not?
Makes sense. That's where I would go.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, what do you think's getting more vulnerability press these days, Chrome or WordPress?
I still think
It's a
WordPress.
tie?
Well, if you include WordPress plugins, man, like I think if you were to put a challenge to us, we could probably cover a WordPress plugin vulnerability every week.
You could have a whole podcast just about WordPress plugins.
Like every week, we could do a show.
No, there's literally
for 30
news
minutes
stories every
and
week.
just talk about how the latest WordPress plugin is being exploited every single week.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, when I saw this one in a different context, I was like, Chrome just can't catch a break right now. It seems like every month they've got issues.
It's a great point, Lee. It's being targeted because it's the most popular browser, right? So there's that.
I get it. It's just sad that you know.
I do like Brave. Brave is a good browser, but again, I mean, all these browsers are based on Chrome anyway. You tend to wonder how much of these.
Some of the back end may be just the same.
Are they
problem.
inheriting some of these? I mean, because you got Edge and now you've got Brave, and
you don't know how much of that. Yeah, it was pulled right out.
And
there.
Chromium is open source. I mean, but the Chromium open source one has some stability issues. I don't think it's seen the adoption it could have because of some of those stability and usability issues with Chromium. I tried using it. I was like, Chrome is sucking up so much CPU in my system for performance reasons. Let me just try alternatives. Chromium was one on my list, and it crashes a lot.
Yeah.
It was kind of that thing like when I studied Kung Fu and my grandmaster, who also had a brother, and we would ask him like, well, you had a brother, like why didn't your brother study Kung Fu? He cried too much. Like, why don't you use Chromium? It crashed too much.
Yeah. And I mean, but you got to go some to get to go to WordPress. There was like another GoDaddy. All that GoDaddy stuff this week was all backdoors in WordPress plugins. So it's the same thing, and it just that thing is just so it's just really, but it's easy to use.
Speaking of vulnerabilities, CISA adds 14 Windows vulnerabilities to the must patch list. Yeah. They've got over 300 on their. For government agencies, this isn't like recommended. This is like
must.
You must address these vulnerabilities within this time window.
And it's
like
pretty short.
Their list, like 300 is, again, you're right. It's short comparative to all of the vulnerabilities that exist in the world that even have a CVE. We're probably beyond 40,000 likely to this point of CVEs that have been issued. So here's 300 you need to focus on. But like here's 14 that they just added. Now what I'm told is like a lot of organizations are seeing a huge security benefit to going like take these 14 and like just make sure these are patched. Like, print spoolers I think on that list. Some privilege escalation that we've talked about recently is on that list. Like people are exploiting that. Make sure you go address these. Is that a valid strategy? Right. That's what I was trying to get at in the previous segment.
It's easy to say just patch. I mean, I say it all the time, just patch. But actual patching in real life is not as simple as just patching.
Right.
I mean, you go in and say, I've got to patch, I don't know, say your border firewall. I mean, okay, we're going to take everybody down and we're going to hope that this, comes back up.
Yeah, but like patching and upgrading are,
I mean, I know you need to do it, and I say it all the time. I'm saying, but it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. And when you have limited resources, but
there's blurred lines, Doug, between patching and upgrading, right? Like there's
some of these are updates. That's different, right? Like there's patching, and then there's like updating. Like if you're one jump away in any organization from domain admin with something like Print Spool or Hive Nightmare, Zero Logon, all of those are addressed with SUS server and Windows updates, and you should be doing those automatically.
Oh yeah, that's just lame when you don't do
those.
That's
pretty lame, but that's one hop away from DA, which is a lot of places are getting popped. And that's bad.
But there are things on that CISA list which it says they added 500 just since November, and
now Doug, it's CISA, not CISA. I learned
all right, I'm leaving. So I'm gonna join Josh. I'll see you. I'm gonna go to the bar. So screw you guys. I'm going home.
There's a side effect to this list that's growing, and that is that government agencies are required to report on the status of all of those vulnerabilities in their agency. In other words, of the 400 or 500 vulnerabilities, they have to report on whether any of them is there, patched or not.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are easy because they're
Windows updates.
Well, no, the Windows updates, which is a certain level of difficulty, but there's also ones that are like SonicWall, and like if you don't have SonicWall, that one's pretty easy. Like make sure I don't have SonicWall. Like pretty sure if I go through my accounting records, we never bought SonicWall, right? Maybe I run a sweep just to make sure, but like if you don't have that, you're not vulnerable. But if you're Windows, which most people are, you got to do some reporting there.
And print spoolers in so many things. I mean, it's not just in it could be in all kinds of different systems. It's been used down through the years, and a lot of people are nervous about saying, let's just patch this, we'll replace it or delete it, and then all of a sudden stuff stops working, and all of a sudden you've got more complicated problems.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we would nitpick on is like, I addressed all these 300 vulnerabilities, and I think largely as a security community we say that's good. But where it crosses the line, it was like, we addressed all these 300 and now we're secure. No, right?
No, because here's 200 more.
We're compliant. We're secure. Like, don't say those things.
Well, that's the same thing we said earlier about MFA. I was saying that. It's like, don't just say, we did this, now we're good. Right. We can quit. We can take a vacation.
Yeah, right. Like, we're doing good. If you address those 300, we're doing good. And that's good. Don't stop there. Like, but maybe use that as some of your priority. Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy, right? Can't stop.
I mean, you got to actually do it right. Like things like the Print Spooler or Hive Nightmare. Some of those require 2 steps. You apply a patch and you have to delete your volume shadow copies so that those aren't hanging out.
Or you have to reboot, right? Rebooting is the thing.
And just saying. I mean, I just today I was sitting there on a system and I was like, I really need to reboot this system, and I'm like, oh damn it. I don't want to do that today because it may not come back up the way I thought, and I'm going to have to drive.
And users hate rebooting. They do.
I mean, I was a mainframer. We had an IPO. And I mean, there's literally like the whole IPO. I remember the IPO volume sitting there, and it was like a 4 to 6 hour process.
IPL before the IPO?
IPL, intentional power. I'm sorry.
It's IPL. No, wait, it's
IPL.
Initial program
intentional
loader.
Power loss.
Oh, it's a loaded acronym.
Yeah.
Lee said one.
Intentional power loss is the other one.
Yeah. Initial program load is one.
Yeah, initial program load. That's the next part of the IPL. The IPL is when you turn it off. So there's a whole set of steps. Like one of the systems I supported, it took about 4 hours to do the steps just to shut it down. Then it took another bunch of hours to bring it back up with the initial program load. And you had to write scripts, and it wasn't just a matter of like, I'm going to push this button and it'll all come back up in about 30 minutes.
When I was in a particular organization, IPL was a verb. Like they had manifested it into a verb.
It was absolutely a verb,
Like I'm going to IPL the mainframe.
Or it was an IPL. It was this weekend we've scheduled an IPL. We're going to take it down on Friday night. We have to have it back up by noon on Sunday.
It was a process, like several hours.
It was a long process. And there was this there's a fear that's it's a superstition based on a real fear, which is that what if it doesn't come back up?
Oh, yeah.
And then we're sitting here going, okay, it's Saturday. I've got to call company X and say, can you get an engineer to fly out here?
Right.
And when will they get here? Because we don't have any idea why this is not coming back up.
And if you had a lot of budget and did the appropriate planning, you flew that person out regardless. So you had them there on site. Like, I've been in situations where...
we had an engineer at the bank, and they were on site, but they did not support IPL.
Yeah.
So if you started IPLing stuff, you had to have a special engineer brought in just for the IPL process. And so when we did IPLs, we had an engineer flown in that came there, and they wanted to schedule. So it wasn't something you said, oh, there's this giant problem. We need to IPL tomorrow. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's going to be probably like, I don't know, April 7th.
I think this is the evolution of technology. We need to push more towards the ephemeral workloads, it doesn't matter if it goes away. I'm going to blow it away, and it's going to recreate itself, and that's just a process.
And that's maybe a future model that will help to fix some of this stuff and keep these from being issues.
I mean, it's why I love containers, but again, every environment is different, and you've got various levels.
Even today, reboot your Active Directory domain controller in a mid-sized company. And all of a sudden half your stuff goes offline, and when you bring it back up, stuff's not working, or it tombstones a bunch of other stuff, and then you're just like, it's going to be a long weekend.
It's like why we have UPSs, because we don't want shit to go down and have to reboot
No, it's exactly why we got giant generators sitting out there ready to come online, like on a capacitor, because we don't want anything to be rebooted and ever to shut down. And when you start getting into some of this equipment that's not been shut down in years and years and years,
right.
and it's just the whole idea of rebooting is just anathema to a lot of people with good reason.
So you reminded me of two stories, Doug. One is one of the data centers that we had on site. Unexpectedly, the whole data center shut down. They got it back online, and they were asking people what had gone on, and they asked everybody, and they got to the new janitor, and they're like, "Do you know anything about this?" He says, "I don't know. I was finished cleaning the floor here. I took my tools over to the elevator. I pushed the big red call button, and the place went dark."
Oh, dear.
Again.
Oh my God!
Was that like the Halon? Was that like the Halon system button that he pushed?
No, this was the EPO button.
Yeah.
And done right, EPO cuts the power for the UPS.
Emergency power outage.
Yeah.
That button should not be available.
No, it needs a cover. But the other one, a little more mundane, is I remember being in a seminar, and they were talking about disaster planning and how to be ready. And one of the people in the back said, "So when do I get to go in the data center and start kicking cords out of the wall?"
Oh, right. God. But that's the thing. I mean, that's why I think we move towards virtualization and containers and more ephemeral infrastructure, is to be like, okay, to be more resilient, stuff's going to get destroyed and rebuilt all the time. And we're just going to be ready for it, right? We're going to be resilient towards that.
That's why VMware has such a successful platform, right?
Yeah.
They've got VMware, they've got HA, they've got failover, all the storage is live mirrored geographically. Like, you can be high availability and not ever have anything go down and reboot things on a regular basis.
Can you imagine?
But even when I was, as we evolved, not necessarily evolved, right? But as we had more options than just the mainframe, as a sysadmin, we would always, if you were on a really good team, you would schedule reboots, right? Yeah. And maybe not everything all at once, but to prepare for that time when maybe you did lose power and lose a generator, right? You would go through and be like, all right, every 2 weeks, maybe, twice a month, look, these systems, I'm going to reboot them. I'm going to monitor. Like, I'm going to do a maintenance window. Every 2 weeks, this first set of systems, they're going to be rebooted, and I'm going to deal with all the fallout, right? And so you would it's kind of not like chaos engineering, but kind of like that step towards chaos engineering, where I'm going to cause a failure, deal with the results so that I can be more resilient to that
that'll last about 4 weeks tops.
Dude, it was hard. It's hard. That's what I'm saying. It's a high-performing team that does that. Yeah, dude. Back in the day, right, when we had all physical hardware in the data center, dude, that was hard. It was hard.
And sometimes you just can't face it. I mean, I've just sat there and gone, I need to reboot this, and I just don't want to do it because I'm busy and I've got this other stuff to do. And if I take this down and it doesn't come back up, I'm going to be here all weekend.
Yep.
And I've got to fix it. And the phone's going to start ringing because.
But better to do that when you're expecting it and you've scheduled the downtime versus not. But again, still really hard.
And then stuff piles up, and you start going back to the committee and going, can we take this offline this Saturday? And they go, oh my God, no, that's when we've got to do this reporting, and we can't.
I was talking to someone from the university. He was like, yeah, we had to do an internet outage, but we couldn't do that because the Patriots were playing. Then everyone was watching the game, so you can't take the internet out. Everyone's watching the game.
I mean, that's when they come with pitchforks and torches.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get hung from the castle wall. I mean, it's bad. And I mean, we always faced. I mean, I worked at a bank. I supported systems that were 24/7. And if we went down, there was something like $8,000 a minute for downtime.
Sure.
And you have to go down to the floor and go, okay, we're going to reboot. It's going to take 8 hours. And guess what the manager said? No, you're not.
Really cool story that I want to make sure we cover. Building a password purgatory with Cloudflare pages and workers. Troy Hunt made this amazing post, and so there's multiple amazing things. One is the concept behind this, sort of it's kind of like a honeypot, but I like his analogy to purgatory. But also the other amazing thing is how Troy walks you through building this application using Cloudflare pages, using GitHub Actions, the whole if you will, DevOps, not that it's necessarily, but the development process and environment I learned a lot from that. But also his kind of honeypot idea I thought was great. Also, I really am close to this scenario in that it was, Troy runs a really popular blog and gets a lot of these spam messages that all read the same way. I want to help you increase SEO for your site, blah, 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 blah. And so his solution to this problem that is clearly addressing this spammer type email, that is one type of spam email that many of us get, is to create a password purgatory. So it's a service. Its API is designed to take a password, find something wrong with it, and send it back with a response. Start out gentle, maybe minimum length, get increasingly bizarre, and then a separate service will log the attempts. The point is, no matter what password you provide it, it will always come back and say it does not meet the length and or complexity requirements, sending essentially the, I don't know if you call it an attacker or a spammer, into an endless loop. More spammer into an endless loop. I'm like, dude, that's great. It totally goes back messing with people, right?
High interaction honeypots. That's what Illumia's whole business model's around. Is it just keeps them busy. It stands up, on the fly services and provides the next breadcrumb to allow them to keep interacting with that even across multiple hosts. So that high interaction honey token will keep an attacker pretty busy for quite a while.
Yeah. And the other amazing part was how he built the backend infrastructure. And his kind of, because Troy is an amazing developer, and really, you have to go read this article. Doesn't matter. You have to go read this article because it was really cool in how he built it.
I love stuff like that. I mean, I think that's it just gives you a sense of satisfaction.
Yes.
It's like I used to have this system where I could put people on hold. And it was like a hold, and they would call me, and they'd be like, "Hi, this is Michelle." It was in the article. This is Michelle, and
Michelle in the article.
And I'm like, "Yeah, Michelle. You know what? I am interested in that insurance policy. Can I put you on hold for just a second?" And then it just literally dumped them on hold forever. I never until they hung up. And it was amazing how long some of these people would sit on hold. I would get a report on it. It would be like, this person's on hold for an hour and 5 minutes. They held just in case I would come back and go, "Okay, can we talk about the insurance policy now?"
Now, it's interesting in the example, the spammer says, and I quote, "I read some of your content and am very much interested to write for your website." And sometimes in the past, I've responded back to these people, and I'm like, "Hey, what content did you read, and what was interesting about it?" Crickets.
Oh yeah, it's probably a bot. Even it's just because I get those all the time, and I'm like, "What content? What are you talking about? Right. You know, like we were reading your website yesterday, and your content was extremely interesting. We would love to provide, additional content to put on your website.
But I think his ruse.
What website?
But Troy's ruse is, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're awesome.
If you want to contribute content, go ahead and create an account, and you can submit your content. Yeah. And then you end up put that person in password purgatory, which I think is friggin' awesome. Right?
I love it.
It's great.
Of course, I will counter with. We found we used to use honeypots all the time, and it was way back, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was a blast. I mean, I got that same sense of satisfaction. I had port forwarding on like port 23 and stuff, went straight to honeypot, and I just laughed my head off looking at how much time some of these people spent thinking they're in and mine was just a loop. It looked like Telnet. It looked like you connected. It looked like you cracked the password. Like the first password they tried, they're in. Yeah. They're like, oh my God, we got in with the password. These guys are idiots. And then it would just literally put you in a shell that you could sit there until you died typing stuff. But the problem was,
legitimate users found it?
Yeah, too. But it was really more, it did tend to attract angry, violent attackers who got frustrated and said, okay, we were just looking for something easy. Now we're going to hurt you. And
now we're going to DOS your site.
And they went after everything we had, and they went after all our web services and everything with serious intent. They were just cruising, but then they got mad.
Now they want vengeance.
And so as an enterprise, there's definitely some downside to setting things. It's fun if you're just a sort of isolated entity and it's a blast, but if you're an enterprise and you start setting these things up, it can definitely create situations you may not want to get involved in. And,
agreed.
Yeah.
The FTC is fining CafePress for a cover-up of a breach. The FTC is fining the custom T-shirt and merchandise site with $500,000 fine for failing to secure its users' data and attempting to cover up a significant data breach impacting millions.
No.
This is good. Is this good? This is good, right?
It is good, but it's good. Like, imagine that somebody trying to cover up a data breach.
I feel like the FTC brings down the hammer like randomly.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not a consistent hammer. It's like, I saw this bad thing and you're fined. And then like random amount of time, another random incident, like, all right, you're fined.
Probably heavily correlated with how many attorneys the company can afford to hire.
There's a lot of randomness here, man.
I've seen these before, and I'm like, okay, well, why didn't you do something about these other 35 data breaches I saw last week? I didn't see the FTC going after these guys. Why did you go after this one company? But
correct.
Right. And it makes the cynic in me starts going, is there politics involved in this? Or, I
don't like government oversight for that kind of stuff. Like, I think it's important for getting better. I think the fining of these companies is a slippery slope. Like, if we can
how do you apply consistency? Consistency to the number of organizations, but also the amount of the fines, like in all that. If there could be some consistency to it, it could be a good enforcement arm. The FTC to me is seemingly kind of random, which, that's, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of like a speed trap. Like, I don't want people to speed, and I'm going to set up a speed trap like randomly every once in a while. And I mean, does that make people speed less? Not necessarily, right?
Yeah. And they'll probably just weigh the fine and the risk of a fine and see, does the risk outweigh the return? And, we're going to lose business because, I mean, you can imagine what a T-shirt site's going to get if they release information that they got a huge data breach and whatever. So they're going to probably go bankrupt. So, but how likely is it the FTC is going to hit us with a fine? And then you have to look at that. And I'm sure somebody does. And then you got to hire a bunch of attorneys.
Yeah.
Because you don't see these big companies getting hit with fines like that. I mean, have you seen? Maybe you do. Have you? But have you? And what's?
I guess I should. I haven't necessarily tracked that as closely, right? But I remember the FTC going after D-Link and Netgear for some vulnerabilities.
Well, the FTC did say they had been breached multiple times, and they had not made any efforts to correct these problems. They just basically said we don't care, and and I guess maybe it was so heinous that they decided to take action.
Yeah. It's still random, dude.
Yeah, it seems pretty random to me.
I think we should be able to detect this DNS tunneling. So this new Linux botnet that uses the log4j flaw. One thing I read in the article, it says the bot sends stolen sensitive information, command execution results, and any other information that needs to be delivered over a C2 as a DNS request. To me, like, this is a pretty easy thing if you're monitoring your DNS traffic. Like, there's a lot of even open source and commercial solutions that I think is pretty easy to implement that should stick out like a sore thumb. I mean,
you don't even need to monitor it.
But it's even after the fact.
Just block port 53 and allow only port 53 traffic to the ones you want to use.
Sure, they can still funnel over that, but...
So that actually, from a C2 standpoint, I'm not sure on this one, like, from a C2 standpoint, like, we used to always get on boxes that couldn't get out, had no 53. They could only communicate with their DNS. So you just do authoritative records where you're requesting subdomains of A records of authoritative, and that went through your DNS and up the chain and back down. Similar to how this is doing it. This one is a little bit different from like typical C2, like say with DNS beaconing. This one leverages both UDP and TCP, and it is going out, connecting to a bind server, sending the first DNS query out to the public. There's a bind server for the DNS query going to the web service, and then there's the local DNS, which is UDP with different priority levels, and all of the traffic is getting shoved inside of the base 64 code in the in the middle.
My way won't work,
but still,
no. I mean, yours would 100% work if
not on this though. Yeah, no, you're right. I agree.
But it still looks different, and like whether UDP or TCP, like there's a certain profile of DNS traffic when I want to resolve a name and get a response versus getting all of that data that the C2 infrastructure needs to, like, again, like the stolen information is sent over DNS. Like that should stick out. Like in number of packets and volumes, data size and volume.
All that.
Once and that's not difficult to analyze. Like I've done it. It's really not difficult
if you've got an analyst in a SOC. I mean,
if you've got the right monitoring in place.
Yeah, that's the thing, is if you have to be looking for it. So this is all RFC compliant, so the size shouldn't matter for these ones, but you're 100% right. You're going to have, 500,000 subdomains or subdomains.
The requests might be small, Tyler, to your point. Requests are small, but the sheer volume of those
is going to be high.
Is going to throw red flag.
So you ought to see that big spike in DNS traffic. Okay, something's wrong. All of a sudden we're getting so many DNS requests. So, yeah.
But again,
I'm not sure why this is such a interesting piece. Maybe it's because it's Linux. Like I wasn't sure because it has, it's got standard command, it's got standard injection, SOX proxy, installs the backdoor, does some shell execute stuff. Like nothing super novel from a C2 standpoint, but the fact that maybe they're using log4j with DNS tunneling that has C2 capability, maybe that's a little more novel for Linux.
But the thing is, like with DNS, one of the great things about DNS is I cache the responses. And so the anomalous traffic stands out, because if there's a lot more DNS traffic, like why do you need that much more traffic? Like if I made a request and got a response, I'm going to cache that response. But what's the need for more traffic in that? Like I've already got the mapping to domain name to IP address, and I've cached it. And so
that's why they have to use the random string, right? Like you're doing a random string of a subdomain so that those random strings don't have collisions and it can't get cached. You're 100% right. Like you should see, this should be easy to alert on from a heuristic standpoint of multiple domain, volume of it, and subdomains of subdomains or random subdomain strings. Like those are all things that are fairly easy and trivial to find.
So if you have a baseline and if you're watching, you ought to be able to see this.
I mean, I've deployed Security Onion, and I can pick up on a lot of these attacks. Looking at DNS.
You can.
Again, you need an analyst to be able to look into
out of the box. Security Onion will find it.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it gives you a great profile of all your DNS traffic.
So, I mean, it's a great tool, but it requires you have some people dedicate cycles to it. Somebody has to ride herd on it. It has to be something that you've committed to, and you have to have somebody doing it and understand your baseline.
Right. And that's not all organizations, right? Again,
that's not even a majority of organizations.
I'm talking to pen testers, Tyler, and a lot of my other friends. They're testing organizations where this attack, like you're not trying that. Like DNS tunneling, you're not trying, because those organizations, they're totally finding that right away.
Yeah,
that's not every organization, but
that's not where I want to put my botnet either. I mean, I want to put my botnet somewhere where you're not going to find it. And
if you're going to put your botnet there, you're not using this C2 technique.
No,
like you're just not.
DNS is noisy. Like if they're looking for it, they will find it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too. I was talking with John Strand a little bit about C2, and then we can talk for a very short period of time and glean a lot from each other on like what's effective, right? And what John brought up again, which is something that comes up over the years so much, is that if I use as an attacker a really old technique, a really old piece of malware, a really old C2 channel, so many of the modern detection solutions and strategies completely miss out on that, because they're like they tune, and I say this could be open source, commercial, whatever, like, or the organization itself, you tune your detection strategies to relevant stuff that's happening now, so much so that the older stuff like falls out. And so like an old version of Meterpreter, you go pull that down from open source or whatever and run it through, like it totally works, because no one's looking for it anymore. I thought that was interesting.
That's why
Tyler's smiling at us.
That's why radar systems don't detect Molotov cocktails being thrown off the roof.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's just like, okay, if it works, use it. And smart attackers do just that. And it does become an issue of the sheer volume of stuff you'd have to know becomes so overwhelming that you know, it's just like, okay.
However, from what people have told me, Cobalt Strike totally getting picked up on like everywhere, because
it's so prevalent. Everybody's using it.
It takes a lot of customization to make it do things in a manner that gets by stuff. But that is like getting your infrastructure right. You've got comms, you've got the protocol, you've got how you're running your traffic, what IPs you're going through, if you're using, Cloudflare, domain fronting, all of the things. You're not staging. Your traffic profile is not something from the public. You've modified all the OPSEC configuration bits. Like, there's a million things for configuration just to get to the point where you're building payloads. And then in the payloads, you've got 500 things that you've got to get around for AMSI, for execution bypass, how you're loading your stager, your dropper, how you're injecting into memory, what processes you're calling when you inject, how the APIs are handling read, write, execute bits in memory. Like, all those things are configurable. So Cobalt Strike has that capability. That's why everyone uses it, because it can be so customized. But not everybody knows how to customize it and do ops right in an OPSEC manner, safe way.
I did want to talk about the dirty pipe exploit again briefly, because there was a researcher that did post that it works on Pixel 6 Pro and Samsung S22. The interesting bit is that what they said in the article I thought was interesting was that Linux vulnerabilities that exist in the kernel don't always translate into Android, because it's such a customized Linux kernel for Android, but that this particular one, from my assessment, is so fundamental to Linux that it's going to exist in the kind of ports of the Linux kernel to an Android platform. It exists there. And this researcher showed through a tethered USB device, right? They didn't show it remotely, although I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. More for like rooting your device and being able to debugging locally on USB.
This was jailbreaking. Yeah, I mean, I think
it's more of a jailbreaking.
More interesting at being a jailbreaker.
Maybe jailbreaking, maybe forensics. To get
root
root access to a local device.
Yeah, one term's got a negative connotation, but it's really the same thing.
So I don't think this is necessarily like a remote. It could work its way into like remote exploits and in-apps and things like that.
Maybe.
But they did show that this is totally possible on Android OSs from both Google's latest version of the phone, which is what I use. I use Google Pixel 6 Pro, which is an awesome phone, by the way. But the exploit totally works on that platform, which I thought was really interesting, how ubiquitous this particular privilege escalation was in the wild.
Yeah, these are getting harder and harder to find on the Android platform. Like, it's gotten pretty secure if you're using Google latest on Google hardware. They've done a really good job. So when you see these, like, a lot of the rooting community, a lot of the ROMing community, all of them are going to be all over this, and it's going to get, mainstreamed. But that also means Celebrite and all of those companies that are leveraging very similar things for commercial products in order to get the same level of access on your phone. So,
yep. Oh.
Lee, do you have other stories?
Actually, I was thinking we covered the ones I really wanted to talk about.
I think you and Doug
when I was
both
playing
had
with a bunch of Ukraine stories.
Yeah, you and Doug both had the Germany warns against using Kaspersky software, which is just, I mean, the U.S., that was years ago. We talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, I say, here's a product that's made by a hostile foreign. I mean, I understand Kaspersky is not a Russian state entity, but just like China, you don't really get to just be an independent operator in Russia or China. And if the government calls you, and they can change the rules just by saying the rules have changed, and say you're required to release all your data, you're required to build a backdoor into your software, and there's literally nothing you could do about it if you're one of these companies. I mean, you could refuse, in which case you won't be around very long.
So you're familiar with us getting security stories from a threat post, right?
Yes.
Do you know who owns Threat Post?
Is that Kaspersky?
Yep.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that, Liam. Interesting you point that out. Yeah,
that is interesting.
I'm not saying Threat Post is bad or that whatever.
We've used them as a source,
but it's the same problem.
It's one of the more credible sources out there in cybersecurity for articles that we've pulled from Lee over the past 17 years. Right? Like
That's sort of the point. It's like,
I usually vet anything that I think looks even remotely suspicious. Like I do that for everything. I mean, it's like if I see a news story that says, this is caused by that, I usually go look and see, do 2 or 3 outlets are also reporting that story, and I do that with cybersecurity stories as well.
Yes.
And
you can find it. That's a great point, Doug, and lead to your point as well. Like, if this notion or fact is coming out about cybersecurity and it's being covered by one news outlet, you tend to vet it in our other news outlets covering the same story, and are they covering it the same way, and put all the pieces together. I mean, that's how you have to kind of draw conclusions from what's being reported in the media today, let alone cybersecurity, which is making our jobs
unless it's something obvious. I mean, if it's just something where it's like factual and it's just like, okay, Linux kernel does this, well, I'm not that worried about it. I go back
to the original.
I want to chase that down where they got their source.
Either in my article I post or in the description, I will say, like, go read the original research. It's either linked to in this article or I link to it explicitly. Like, that's the truth. Whatever the media is saying about it may or may not be true, but, like, I read the research from the people who discovered whatever, and I believe that to be the source of truth, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, there is some cool stuff coming out related to the Ukraine, like their use of the Clearview AI for facial recognition to just, find people. I mean, creepy but at the same time, it's kind of cool use of technology. I'm not taking a side. That's kind of neat. It actually works.
Well, yeah, they were identifying bodies and people that that were injured and things like that, and it's pretty useful in that regard. I mean, if you can say, here's an injured person, I want to find out what I can find out about them, and you can get their name or whatever, and you can at least maybe they have allergies or who knows what.
Yeah, well, you remember what we thought when we first heard, like, London was putting cameras on every street corner, and oh my God, now look where we are. I mean, this is kind of a nice use of that kind of a technology. Yeah. So, the hell.
Awesome. Anything else you guys want to cover this week?
That's probably about it for me.
We covered a lot of stories.
I'm good.
Awesome.
We did a lot of stories.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you next time on Security Weekly. Over and out.